Now let's start with today's story. My journey didn't begin as I had hoped. I was scheduled to attend a conference in Minneapolis on Thursday and Friday, but things felt different this time. Normally, my wife, Margot, would take half a day off to see me off, making my departure feel special. This time, however, she simply gave me a quick goodbye kiss before heading to work. Let me introduce myself. I'm Adam. I'm 49 years old, happily married to Margot for 24 years, and we have 2 children, Reed, 22, and Emmeline, who just turned 20. I left work at 3 p.m. and headed to the airport, as I always like to arrive early for my 6 p.m. flight to avoid the stress of running late. Everything was going smoothly until I received disappointing news. My flight was delayed due to bad weather and an approaching snowstorm. After a 45-minute wait, we finally boarded. About 30 minutes into the flight, I noticed the plane making a subtle leftward turn. At first, I assumed it was a minor adjustment, but it soon became clear that we were turning around. The pilot confirmed my suspicion. Due to the severe snowstorm, landing in Minneapolis was impossible, and we had no choice but to return to our departure airport. Once back on solid ground, I rushed to the airline's check-in desk to rearrange my travel plans. Fortunately, I managed to secure one of the last available seats on the next morning's flight. Though disappointed about missing part of the conference, I remained determined to attend. Holding on to a glimmer of hope, I called my contact in Minneapolis to inform them of the delay and left a detailed voicemail for my boss. Feeling the weight of the day, I called home, looking forward to hearing Margot's voice. To my surprise, she didn't answer. When I arrived home, I noticed the house was dark and her car was missing from the driveway. That was odd. I left my luggage in the car and cautiously stepped inside. To my relief, I heard voices coming from the living room, only to realize it was just the television left on. This unsettled me because I was certain I had turned it off before leaving. I switched it off and searched for any sign of Margot, but she was nowhere to be found. Anxiously, I called her cell phone. When she finally answered, she greeted me warmly, her voice filled with the familiar concern and interest that had always been a part of our marriage. When I asked where she was, she casually replied that she was at home, watching TV. Her response stopped me in my tracks. If she was home, why had the house been dark? Why was her car gone? A wave of exhaustion from the day's events washed over me, and in that moment, all I wanted was to be with my wife, to find comfort in her presence, even if only for a few hours. But in just 30 seconds, the anticipation of reuniting with her was replaced by a deep sense of unease. Instead of returning to the warm embrace of the woman I had trusted for 24 years, I was suddenly faced with the chilling possibility of lies and betrayal. My mind raced with questions. Had she really cheated on me? And if so, why? There seemed to be no logical explanation for her dishonesty. Was she at work? Out with friends? At a restaurant? I must have remained silent for too long because Margot's worried voice eventually broke through. "Are you still there?" she asked. Snapping back to reality, I muttered, yeah, sorry. We landed at O'Hare. I have to go." With a heavy heart, I abruptly ended the call. When the phone rang again, I turned it off, needing space to process my thoughts. Sitting on the couch in the eerie silence of my home, I felt numb. The question haunted me. Why did Margot lie? Maybe there was a logical explanation. Perhaps she was planning a surprise. After all, I had orchestrated a few elaborate deceptions myself 4 years ago for our 20th wedding anniversary. I had secretly planned a 2-day cruise, involving her boss and parents in the process, weaving a web of deception. As confusion clouded my thoughts, memories of that lie resurfaced. One persistent thought crept in, one I refused to accept. I rejected it outright. Not us. We couldn't be in this situation. It was unthinkable. Yet, there it was. Realizing that my daughter, Emmeline, might know about Margot's surprises and plans, I quickly dialed her number from memory. Her familiar voice greeted me, asking how I was. I responded with genuine curiosity, inquiring about her well-being. She told me she had just finished her homework and was watching TV. Sensing the importance of the moment, I cautiously asked if she had spoken to her mom recently and if Margot had mentioned anything unusual. Emmeline told me they had their usual weekly call on Sunday, which gave me a sliver of hope. I then carefully asked if she knew anything about a surprise Margot was planning, making it clear that I didn't want to know the details, only whether Margot was preparing something. I held my breath as I waited for her response. Emmeline's answer crushed my hopes. She said she didn't know anything and asked what was going on. Searching for an explanation, I told her that Margot had been acting a bit strangely, and I wondered if she was hiding a nice surprise, perhaps for my 50th birthday. But Emmeline quickly dismissed the idea. reminding me that we had already celebrated my birthday last month. Having failed to gather any information, I accepted the truth and wished my daughter good night. Her voice carried a hint of disappointment as she responded. The realization sank in. There was no surprise. But then, why had Margot deceived me? Possible explanations swirled in my mind. Perhaps it was related to an upcoming promotion. That had to be it, I reasoned, though I couldn't understand why she would lie about it. Lately, she had been staying late at work, dedicated as ever. But deep down, Margot knew no promotion was worth the time we had lost together. She knew I wanted her to cut back on work hours so we could spend more time as a family. A reasonable request, one she understood. Ironically, I recalled an important decision I had made just months before our 20th anniversary. I had turned down a promotion. Nearly 5 years earlier, I had eagerly accepted the role of Vice President of Finance at my company, a position that required frequent travel to the headquarters in Chicago and visits to factories across the country. Initially, I was excited about the job offer, but Margot quickly raised concerns, making me reconsider my decision. I couldn't ignore the cautionary tale of a colleague who went through a divorce just 2 years after accepting a similar position. While financial success was a reward for him, it came at the cost of loneliness and suffering. Given our circumstances and the fact that our children still needed guidance and support through their remaining school years, Margot understandably didn't want to shoulder that responsibility alone. Throughout the week, we had long discussions about the potential consequences of accepting the promotion. Gradually, it became clear that I was on the verge of losing sight of what truly mattered: my wife and children. Regaining clarity, I made the heartfelt decision to decline the offer, recognizing that my commitment to my family took precedence over material success. The past few months had been challenging as Margot pushed hard for her own promotion. It resurfaced doubts I had about my own career growth. Now that our children were in college, it was just the two of us. While Margot believed her promotion would have minimal impact on our lives, just a few more business trips, I worried about the many hours of overtime it would require. Seeing my wife for only an hour or two each weekday left me feeling dissatisfied. Brief moments together weren't enough, and the lack of quality time weighed heavily on me. The distance between us was undeniable. Margot became increasingly consumed by work, spending not only weekdays but also Saturdays and Sundays at the office. When she returned home, exhaustion overtook her, leaving little energy for anything else. It had been weeks, maybe even longer, since we had truly been close. The details blurred into a haze, but the growing emptiness between us was unmistakable. While I acknowledged that age played a role in our diminishing physical connection, it was difficult to ignore the absence of the intimacy we once shared. I couldn't shake the feeling that Margot's deception during our phone call was her way of avoiding my concerns, hiding behind her work commitments. But in fairness, I, too, had been away on business trips and had worked overtime on occasion. Still, there was one simple way to uncover the truth. I decided to call Margot's direct line at T-Bold Advertising to confirm her whereabouts. To my surprise, her colleague, Jake Turnbull, answered the phone. Startled, I quickly composed myself, expecting to hear Margot's voice. I greeted him, using my nickname, but his response caught me off guard. He casually mentioned that I should be enjoying a vacation with Margot. His words sent a shock through me. Something was wrong. Trying to remain calm, I pressed for more details about this supposed vacation. Then, realizing I needed to cover my tracks, I quickly apologized for the interruption and made up an excuse, claiming I had dialed his number by mistake. Jake reassured me without hesitation, mentioning that Margot owed him lunch for covering her shift and working late hours. He sighed, complaining that it was already 9 p.m. and he was still at the office. With that, he ended the conversation. The truth was now undeniable. Margot wasn't working. She wasn't even at her office. According to Jake, she had taken a vacation until the end of the week. Panic crept in, tightening its grip on me. Where was Margot? What was she doing? An unwelcome thought invaded my mind. No, it couldn't be. I had always strived to see the best in people, to believe in their inherent goodness. But now, against my will, I was forced to consider the worst. Could this really be happening? Could Margot betray me? The thought of her being with her sister, Veronica, surfaced involuntarily. Over time, we had grown distant from Veronica and her ex-husband, Max. Once, we had been incredibly close, bound by deep friendships and shared experiences. We spent evenings together, supported each other, cared for our children, hosted family gatherings, and even went on vacations as a group. But everything changed one fateful day. I had come home with a throbbing headache and, seeking relief, took a couple of Tylenol before lying down on the couch. Half an hour later, Margot and Veronica returned from a shopping trip, chatting animatedly. They didn't notice me resting nearby. Then, Veronica spoke. She asked if Margot had noticed the new product manager at the grocery store. My heart pounded as I waited for Margot's response. She calmly admitted that she found him attractive and mentioned that he had smiled at her. Then, with a hint of unease, she added that it would be better if he was smiling after their encounter in the back seat of her car. My breath caught. Veronica had declared it so boldly. To my surprise, Margot didn't seem shocked, just disapproving. She cautioned Veronica that she was taking a risk and could lose a good husband. But Veronica, unfazed, dismissed the warning. She confidently assured Margot that she was always careful. With that, the conversation ended, and they left the room, unaware of my presence. I lay there in silence, overwhelmed by uncertainty. As someone who valued honesty and integrity, I had no idea what to think. I struggled under the weight of this revelation, unsure of the right course of action. I found myself at a crossroads, but one thing was certain. Max deserved to know the truth. The knowledge that Veronica's infidelity would devastate him weighed heavily on me. I knew that once he found out, he wouldn't hesitate to kick her out. Did I really want to be the one responsible for dismantling their marriage? Before I could make a final decision, my wife returned home with our children. Knowing that Margot disapproved of her sister's actions brought me some comfort, so I decided to postpone my choice until we could discuss it further. That evening, as we got ready for bed, I carefully brought up the subject, seeking her perspective. I explained what I had discovered and asked whether confronting a cheater with anger was the right response. Margot took a moment to process everything, then hesitantly suggested that the situation was complicated and various factors needed to be considered. Wanting more clarity, I presented hypothetical scenarios, including the possibility of Max himself having been unfaithful before. I was curious to hear her viewpoint. As we spoke, Margot suddenly sat up in bed, gripping her phone tightly, her anger evident. She was determined to inform Veronica immediately. Instinctively, I took her phone gently from her hand, assuring her that I would handle it. It was my responsibility. Though Margot had her doubts, she ultimately agreed. With determination in her eyes, she declared that we wouldn't allow a cheater to stay in our home. If Max kicked Veronica out, she would have to find her own place. Fortunately, Max answered my call. I greeted him with a heavy sigh, calling him his favorite son-in-law. He chuckled, acknowledging that I was his only son-in-law, making me his favorite by default. Then, in a serious tone, he asked why I was calling so late. Taking a deep breath, I carefully broke the news, telling him that I had overheard something devastating. Veronica had been unfaithful. A long silence followed as he absorbed the shock. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible, filled with disbelief. He asked if I was absolutely sure. I confirmed that I had heard it directly from Veronica herself, as she had spoken about it casually, without remorse. Expressing my sympathy, I reassured him that we were there for him and the kids. Max quietly acknowledged my words and hung up. Margot turned to me, her eyes filled with sadness, tears welling up. She whispered that she was proud of me and asked for a hug. Holding her close, I offered her comfort, though I felt just as lost and scared. After a moment, I asked if she thought therapy might help Max and Veronica work through things. Margot, exhausted, mumbled sleepily that once someone strays, they're likely to do it again. Quietly, I agreed. Sometime later, the ringing phone jolted me awake. Trying not to disturb Margot, I groggily answered. On the other end, Veronica's furious voice lashed out, demanding to know what I had told Max. Keeping my voice calm, I simply told her that I had spoken the truth, that honesty was important. Margot, now awake, watched me with concern and quiet determination. Veronica's voice trembled with anger as she accused her sister of betraying her. I responded firmly, saying that sometimes, the truth comes out whether we want it to or not, and that cheaters should face the consequences of their actions. Then, her anger gave way to sobs. Between her tears, she confessed. Max had kicked her out. I reiterated that Veronica's situation was a natural consequence of her actions. Desperately, she pleaded for guidance, asking what she should do and whether she could stay with us. Regretfully, I told her that we couldn't offer refuge to a cheater. She would have to face the situation on her own. She was stunned by my response. Turning to Margot for support, I asked what we should say to someone in Veronica's position. Without hesitation, Margot leaned in and firmly stated that she didn't want a cheater in our home, telling Veronica to stay away. I then sent a message on behalf of both of us, making it clear that Veronica was no longer a part of our lives, and that she should neither visit nor call. Margot nestled closer to me, seeking comfort in my arms, and whispered that she was proud of how I had handled the situation. With that, we drifted off to sleep in peace. However, the morning brought an inevitable storm. Margot's father called, furious, and berated his daughter. Shaken and tearful after the call, Margot struggled to process his anger. I reassured her that this had been our mutual decision. We had discussed it and agreed on cutting ties with Veronica. I reminded her that I had only mentioned a hypothetical scenario regarding Max's potential infidelity, not that he had actually cheated. Then, I posed a difficult question. How was Veronica's betrayal any different? Margot hesitated before defending her sister, arguing that Veronica was family. Disappointed, I questioned whether family ties justified infidelity. Margot was momentarily speechless. 3 years ago, I had made my stance on Veronica clear. I didn't want her near our children or in our home. Though Margot occasionally met her sister in secret, it remained an unspoken taboo between us. She would visit Veronica discreetly while I was away. Over time, Max moved on and was preparing to remarry, while my resentment toward Veronica faded. I no longer cared about her, and in truth, I found peace in her absence. One evening, feeling that the matter needed closure, I gently revisited the subject with Margot. I suspected she carried guilt for deceiving me, though I had long stopped caring. Then, an unexpected event unfolded. I found myself on stage before a large audience at the Congress. In my speech, I addressed two kinds of people, those who deny reality and those who confront it. Suddenly, Dave Millant, Margot's boss, waved his hand and admitted to avoiding my wife. Laughter rippled through the crowd as Jake Turnbull, seated behind Dave, chimed in with a similar confession. Another man added a cheeky remark, amplifying the humor of the moment. Abruptly, I woke up, wiping drool from my face. It was already midnight. I had slept for over an hour. Disoriented, I wondered if Margot had returned home while I dozed off, unaware of my presence. I hurried to the bedroom, but she wasn't there. A realization struck. She was likely with Veronica. Debating whether to call Veronica for answers, I hesitated. Reaching out to her would mean going behind Margot's back. Then, I recalled that I needed to pick up Veronica's children from a specific location. Did I still have Veronica's phone number? As I reached for my phone to check, my gaze landed on the Find My Phone app. A year ago, after misplacing my phone during a trip from New York to Cincinnati, I had installed the app on both of our devices. Curious, I opened the application. Within seconds, it displayed Margot's phone location, Mills Lake. Confused, I wondered why she would be there. Given Veronica's financial struggles, it seemed unlikely that she could afford a place in such an upscale residential area, where cottages cost far more than our modest home. The situation grew even more perplexing. Seeking answers, I turned to Google Earth. I carefully pinpointed Margot's exact location, only to be shocked by the discovery that she was inside an exclusive estate, surrounded by a high stone wall. This revelation left me perplexed. What was Margot doing in such a luxurious millionaire's estate? Mills Lake was about an hour's drive from our town, but my need to understand the truth pushed me forward. At the same time, I realized that confronting her directly would likely lead to evasion or dishonesty. I needed indisputable evidence before I could have any conversation with her. Despite my doubts, overwhelmed by emotions, I quickly made my way to Mills Lake. Regret gnawed at me as I realized I should have checked her phone's GPS locator from the start, instead of making excuses for her actions. Uncertainty clouded my thoughts as I arrived at Mills Lake, unsure of what to expect and still holding a faint hope for a clear explanation. I made my way to the estate, feeling the weight of what awaited me. A large gate blocked direct access to the estate. I knew I wasn't going to drive up to the house and announce my presence while searching for my wife. After considering the situation, I realized parking on the main road would likely attract unwanted attention, perhaps even the arrival of security or law enforcement, especially in such a high-end community. As I drove a little farther, I came across a small path and decided to park my car there. Stepping out, I grappled with uncertainty. How would I get past the towering wall that separated me from the truth? Then it occurred to me that the estate bordered the lake, offering a potential route from that side. Renewed determination filled me as I headed toward the lake shore, my heart racing at the thought of finding an entry point to the estate. I came across a footpath leading to the water's edge and cautiously made my way toward the shoreline. Not knowing which grand cottage Margot was in, I relied on another check of the GPS locator. Eventually, I reached a lavish mansion where several second-floor windows were still lit, while the ground floor remained dimly illuminated. Only one curtain was slightly open, casting a soft, warm glow outside. Looking for a better vantage point, I found a sturdy tree and climbed high enough to peer inside. I spotted a man wearing a white terry cloth robe. He was older and barely recognizable to me. He quickly disappeared from view, but moments later, a woman emerged from inside. It was Veronica. Standing in an open robe, she sipped champagne from a glass. Despite my feelings about her, I couldn't deny that she still had an allure at her age. The pieces began to fall into place, and I realized that Margot was indeed with her sister. This didn't surprise me, given the financial stakes of a divorce. It seemed likely that Veronica was looking for a wealthy partner. Yet, a part of me couldn't help but feel that Margot had been drawn into a lifestyle I disapproved of and didn't want for her. As events unfolded before my eyes, I witnessed something that deeply disheartened me. The man I had seen earlier approached Veronica and began to touch her intimately. He took her champagne glass from her, setting it aside, and I felt the need to climb down from the tree and avert my eyes from this close display. I couldn't help but feel disturbed by what I was seeing. My sensibilities were rooted in traditional views about love and intimacy, values where emotional connection and affection form the heart of a true relationship. What I witnessed felt entirely devoid of love, a shallow and destructive display that lacked the meaningful connection I valued. Even though I had little regard for Veronica, I wouldn't wish this kind of hollow existence on anyone. I turned away, uneasy, as the scene unfolded before me. I contemplated descending from the tree, but as the couple moved away from the window, I locked eyes with Margot. She was sitting on a distant couch, wearing a silly, inebriated smile that made my heart sink. Frozen in disbelief, I saw that her robe was open, revealing a sight that sealed the fate of our marriage. Overcome with shock, I took a step back, but I lost my footing and fell from the tree. The branches broke my fall, and I was lucky to escape with only minor injuries. As I got to my feet, feeling like an old man under the weight of what I had just seen, I wandered aimlessly, lost in a desolate world. Tears welled up in my eyes as I limped back to the car, consumed by profound pain. It wasn't the physical fall from the tree that hurt, but the emotional devastation of losing my happiness and being separated from someone I once loved. During those agonizing minutes, I briefly entertained the idea of breaking into the cottage to confront them. However, the harsh reality of the consequences, potential years in prison for trespassing and assault, quickly extinguished that urge. Alone with my thoughts at night, a storm of emotions raged within me. Denial no longer protected me from the painful truth, and I wrestled with deep sadness and simmering anger. Yet, I recognized the danger of letting that anger consume me. I knew it would only cause more harm to my life. Deep down, I understood that no matter how angry I was, I would never physically harm Margot. As the days passed, I considered my options. The simplest solution would be to return home, pack my things, and leave her. If we lived in a no-fault divorce state, had separate incomes, and no dependent children, the process would likely proceed smoothly. We would divide our assets evenly and go our separate ways. However, part of me still craved justice and revenge. A bold idea took hold of me, and without hesitation, I decided to follow through. Clutching my phone, I dialed Margot's number, anticipating that she wouldn't answer and that I'd be directed to voicemail. I hoped she'd check the message right away. "Hi, honey," I began, my voice filling the voicemail recording. "Since you didn't pick up the home phone, I'm calling you on your mobile. I wanted to let you know not to be alarmed when you hear my keys in the door in a few minutes. After a chaotic flight delayed by a blizzard and uncertain arrival times, I wanted to keep you updated. Our flight was diverted to Chicago, but we're finally on our way home. We don't have an exact landing time yet, but I estimate I'll be home in about 30 minutes. Goodbye." I hung up, knowing Margot would soon get a notification about the new voicemail. I imagined her anxiety growing as she listened to my message late into the night. The timing was unusual, adding to the intrigue. I pictured her eagerly checking her phone, hoping for clarity amid the chaos. I silently prayed she was intoxicated enough not to notice that I couldn't have used my mobile during the flight. Panic must have been building within her as she realized the web of lies she had woven. In a fit of rage, she was probably scrambling to get ahead of me, rushing to get home and hastily dressing while trying to field questions from her sister and lover. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I quickly answered, realizing that she might be trying to gauge my arrival time. I began the conversation in a weary tone, apologizing for possibly waking her up. She assured me it was okay and said she was on her way home, expecting to arrive in about an hour. She ended the call promptly with a simple "okay." Moments later, I saw her car speeding down the highway, exiting the estate's gates. My heart skipped a beat as I watched her reckless driving, nearly swerving into a ditch. It was clear that she was far more intoxicated than I had initially thought. Though I was angry and frustrated, I realized her actions posed a danger not only to herself but also to innocent people on the road. Despite my lingering resentment, I couldn't bear the thought of her life being at risk, especially as the mother of my children. Determined to ensure her safety, I decided to follow her, ready to intervene if necessary. Thinking quickly, I dialed special services and reported the situation, describing the car's erratic behavior, how it had almost collided with mine, and its reckless swerving. I provided the car's details, mentioning that it had pulled off onto the south side of the highway near Mills Lake. It was a dark blue Ford Taurus, and I had memorized the last 4 digits of the license plate. I emphasized the urgency of stopping the vehicle before it caused any harm. The operator thanked me for the report and assured me that a patrol car was on its way to apprehend the intoxicated driver. I kept a safe distance, watching as the situation unfolded. I kept my distance as I followed Margot through the traffic, carefully navigating each turn. A few exits later, I noticed a patrol car moving toward her, its lights flashing as it signaled for her to pull over. I drove past them, a mix of relief and profound sadness settling over me. 45 minutes later, I reached home, weighed down by the events of the night. It was almost surreal. The life of someone I had loved so deeply could have unraveled into a series of tragic consequences in one night. A somber realization crept in as I thought about how her reckless actions could have led to a fatal crash, potentially leaving my children to deal with unimaginable grief. As I stood in the quiet of my home, I reflected on the fragility of life. My love for Margot, while still present, no longer felt like a foundation I could build on. The shared future I had once imagined now seemed impossible. I turned off the home phone and silenced my mobile, needing time to think and collect myself. The weight of her betrayal crushed me, but it was more than just the hurt. It was the realization that the love we had once shared had withered. For 26 years, Margot had been at the center of my world, and now, without her, I felt adrift. The thought of continuing without her, starting over, seemed impossible. Decisions I had always made with her in mind now felt alien. Family had always been my anchor, and now, with the children growing up and moving on, I was left alone, consumed by sadness. I found myself questioning everything. Why did she choose this path? Why cheat when a straightforward divorce might have been more respectful of the years we'd shared? When did she stop loving me? The woman I loved had turned into a stranger, and the presence of her lover left me feeling discarded. In that dark moment, my children became my lifeline. They were a reminder of everything I had lost, but also of what I still had to live for. The thought of them sparked a glimmer of hope, a thread of self-preservation amidst my despair. Soon, they would embark on their own lives, but for now, they were my anchor. To shield myself from the impending pain, I knew I needed distance. It wasn't easy, but I recognized I needed to let go, to sever the ties that had bound me to Margot. The material possessions surrounding me, clothes, a car, a laptop, seemed insignificant now. What mattered was escaping the constant reminder of what I had lost. After some reflection, I made the decision to leave. I packed my things quickly, filling several bags in under 30 minutes. By 6 o'clock in the morning, I had loaded everything into my car, ready to disappear without a trace. Exhausted yet determined, I decided to rest for a moment, knowing Margot would likely still be sleeping off the effects of her night. As I lay there, thoughts about starting over filled my mind. When my alarm rang at 9 o'clock, I was ready to move on, no looking back. I scheduled an urgent meeting with a lawyer and, following that, headed to the shower, symbolically washing away the remnants of my past. With a heavy heart, I removed my wedding ring and placed it solemnly on the table next to the phone. This final act marked the beginning of my journey toward a new chapter in my life, one focused on personal liberation and happiness. I had made the painful decision to express my disappointment in a letter to Margot. Although our conversation had already reached a point of futility, I felt compelled to share my feelings. Margot, it saddens me to acknowledge that I now see you following the path of reckless promiscuity and loneliness, a path that often accompanies your sister. Perhaps it's an inherited trait, a sad legacy. By the time you read this, I will have completely removed myself from your life, ensuring that our paths will never cross again. The extent of your betrayal has left me reeling in pain that I never could have imagined. The intensity of my pain is beyond measure. Nevertheless, I am grateful for the 24 years of happiness we once shared and for the 2 wonderful children you gave me. In an effort to be fair and honest, I will keep this brief in my farewell. May you quickly return to the arms of your beloved, leaving behind our broken family. I thirst for justice that you could never provide. Did your reckless escapades bring you satisfaction or revenge? The man you were with, judging by the grandeur of his mansion, was wealthy. I no longer have any desire to see or talk to you. There is nothing left to discuss. Our lawyers will handle the necessary procedures, and I ask that you promptly sign the divorce papers. The reason for our separation is of no importance. By 10 a.m., I had visited the bank, responsibly addressing our shared credit card debt and closing the accounts. I also obtained a cash receipt for our entire savings and securities, ensuring there were sufficient funds in the checking account to cover the mortgage and utility bills for the next 2 months. Taking another step toward independence, I removed my name from the joint account. After leaving the bank, I held a substantial check for approximately $250,000. Before noon, I arrived at work, surprising my boss, who had expected me to be in Minnesota. When I shared the news of my immediate resignation and relocation, his surprise grew. Our relationship held a unique meaning beyond the typical employer-employee dynamic. My boss had kept his position because I had turned down a promotion, and he had initially been displeased, feeling indebted to me. However, 2 years ago, during his divorce, I had explained that my decision to decline the promotion was due to his situation. Since then, our relationship had evolved into more of an equal partnership. He understood my desire to resign and was willing to accept it without going through the HR department. Instead of writing a check for my 401k, he made me an offer to join their newly established optical division in Tucson. Although the salary would be lower than my current position, there were reportedly affordable housing options there that would allow me to secure decent housing at an attractive price. We sealed the agreement with a handshake, and he agreed to spread the word that I had chosen to leave my job voluntarily. The next step was to meet with my lawyer and explain my decision to separate from Margot. I instructed him to serve her with the divorce papers and grant her the power of attorney to sell the house, which represented 50% of our total assets. Although my lawyer, who was also a close family friend, tried to persuade me to consider other options, he soon realized the significant changes that lay ahead for me. By midnight, I would be in another city, in another state, and without a wife. In the afternoon, I sought rest and stumbled upon a dated motel. Around 8 p.m., using a disposable phone I had acquired for this purpose, I dialed Reed's number. I explained that this was my new phone number. Reed asked if I had heard from Mom, and I revealed that I had found out the day before that she had been unfaithful. He expressed disappointment and concern, asking what I planned to do about it. I shared that I had taken care of everything. I packed my things, cleared my bank accounts, resigned from my job, and was heading south to end my relationship with her. I also mentioned that she would receive the divorce papers by the end of the week. Reed asked if Emmeline knew, and I informed him that she didn't. I assured him that I would keep him updated and promised to call regularly. We exchanged words of love and care, and I reassured him that I loved him and would take care of myself. After the conversation, I contacted Emmeline. The conversation was filled with deep sadness. My children, with heavy hearts, learned the truth about their mother's actions and how they affected our family. Witnessing the destructive influence of Aunt Veronica on her family, my children, like me, tried to comprehend how their mother could inflict the same pain on us. I was certain that Veronica had influenced her sister to act this way. Emmeline, always candid, broke the silence by asking how long it had been happening and how long we had ceased to be enough for her. I comforted her, explaining that the duration and reasons no longer mattered. What mattered was that I had loved her deeply and trusted her with all my heart, and she betrayed that trust. I reassured Emmeline not to worry, saying that I would be okay. Although I was incredibly sad at the moment, I believed I would heal over time, especially if I could maintain some distance from her mom. I promised her that I would share my new address, and she could come to me once her school year was over. As I made this promise, tears welled up in my eyes, and I wanted Emmeline to know that there would always be a place for her by my side in Tucson. The optics division was relatively small, with only 30 employees. The district manager, who resembled his father more than a stern boss, fostered a sense of camaraderie and comfort within the team. I immediately felt like a welcomed guest, which provided some solace during a difficult time. A month later, I chose a lovely condominium. Throughout this period, I maintained no contact with Margot, relying solely on updates from my lawyer and my children. Moving forward was not without its challenges. One situation proved particularly demanding. My lawyer informed me that Margot was ready to contest the divorce, expressing her unwillingness to proceed and her readiness to fight to the bitter end, even if it meant financial ruin for both of us. In response, I calmly instructed my lawyer not to proceed with the divorce court. I said I didn't care anymore and wanted to give her the chance to rebuild her life. After the 24 years of happiness we once shared together, I instructed my lawyer to tell her that I had no desire to continue the relationship and wished her a good life. I added a more colorful message to tell her to go to hell and asked my lawyer if he could deliver that message. My lawyer, recognizing our close connection, replied that he could do it with pleasure, but warned that there would be an additional $150 fee for this. Conversations with the children were more challenging. One by one, I had to convince them that there was no turning back from this decision. The first hurdle came when Emmeline told me, "Dad, Mom completely freaked out when I mentioned that I planned to live with you this summer." I promised Emmeline that I would do my best to visit her and her grandparents. However, her reaction was so concerning that I found it necessary to step away from my phone for a few days. Margot's behavior worsened when Reed decided to split his summer between both of us. I consciously chose not to ask about her, instead focusing on moving forward with my life. It wasn't easy, as remnants of my feelings for her still lingered, a mix of emotions tied to our past before the betrayal. Yet, with the support of my children, I gradually learned more about Margot's state of mind. To my surprise, I discovered she was in a deep depression, mirroring the emotional shock I had once experienced. It was hard to comprehend, especially after everything she had done, but it made sense. Cheating hurts the very people you love, and it ultimately destroys a marriage. After that, you continue with your life. But how could Margot be depressed when I had done everything to let her carry on without me? Her hesitation to divorce seemed like an escape from the reality she had created, a way to avoid facing the consequences of her actions. It felt absurd to me. For a while, I was in denial myself, but she had been living in denial for the past 2 years. Even though our children were in regular contact with me, she used them to express remorse for what she had done, hoping I might reconsider. While I understood that our children still held out hope for reconciliation, I simply couldn't bring myself to speak to her. The distance between us made it more difficult. They were caught between choosing their mother and me. Margot was relentless in trying to find my whereabouts through our children, and after nearly 3 years, she finally managed to track me down. One day, as I left work, I spotted her lurking near the office. I couldn't believe she had discovered where I lived, considering I had kept that information private. From what the kids told me, she was convinced that a face-to-face meeting would change my mind. I knew I had to act quickly and quietly to correct her misconception. I slipped out the side door, my heart racing, and called Lucille to let her know what was happening. I then intentionally positioned myself in Margot's view, driving around the city and stopping at a grocery store before returning home. When I parked at the house, Margot followed me. Lucille, a beautiful 30-year-old Latina, greeted her at the door, holding our 1-year-old daughter. I watched Margot's expression change as she saw Lucille. Lucille greeted her with a warm Spanish accent and asked how she could help. Margot said she wanted to talk to me, and Lucille called out to me from the doorway. I took the baby in my arms, and Lucille told me to care for our daughter while she finished preparing dinner. I turned to Margot and greeted her with a mix of surprise and irony, asking her what she wanted after nearly 3 years apart. She whispered, almost inaudibly, that she needed to apologize and express how deeply sorry she was for the pain she had caused me. She acknowledged that it wasn't my fault, but her own foolishness, and admitted her thoughtlessness and remorse for everything she had done. Margot expressed her love for me, both then and now, describing me as the best husband and father a woman could hope for. Her sincere apologies moved me, but I knew I had to end this moment. Feigning happiness, I replied, "It's all right. This is all in the past now. I haven't thought about it in so long that I can honestly say I forgive you." As I looked down at Tamara, who was beaming with joy in my arms, I added, "I sincerely wish you a joyful life filled with love, much like mine." My voice carried genuine sentiment as I spoke. Margot's tears streamed down her face as she mumbled something I couldn't understand. Hesitantly, she embraced me and quickly left the house. I closed the door behind her, and Lucille, noticing my fragile state, came out of the kitchen. She took Tamara from my arms gently, sensing I needed comfort. I leaned against the closed door, tears flowing as I processed the scene. Lucille wrapped her arms around me, holding me tightly, and kissed my forehead softly. With a determined look, she reached for the phone and said, "I need to let Hugo know I'll be heading home with our daughter soon." Her voice radiated warmth and confidence. I whispered a heartfelt, "Thank you, Lucille," genuinely appreciative of her steady presence and unwavering support. I then told her, "Make sure to tell Hugo I'll be waiting for you at the barbecue on Saturday." Lucille's voice bubbled with enthusiasm. Absolutely, boss. I'll see you at the office tomorrow. The following week, my lawyer received the signed divorce papers from Margot. As I moved forward, I understood that healing takes time, and I needed to find my own pace. I formed friendships with several women, getting close to one of them, though without any serious commitments. It felt like I was finally moving past the pain that had once held me back. I became less fearful around women, shedding the nervousness and timidity I once had. Recognizing this growth, I began to consider allowing Lucille the chance to introduce me to a kind and suitable woman, trusting her judgment. I thought it might be time to open myself to the possibility of meeting someone who could bring true happiness back into my life. But now, after the unexpected encounter with Margot, doubts have crept in. Not about leaving Margot, that decision remains firm, but about my initial belief that we had nothing in common. I had always assumed she understood my stance on infidelity and how I would react if faced with it. Yet, after hearing fragments of Margot's side of the story during our recent conversation, I'm questioning whether I should have avoided this confrontation altogether. Despite my reluctance, one thing is certain. Removing myself from her life was the best decision for me. It allowed me to find peace and begin healing away from the toxic environment we had shared. I loved Margot so much that if I had encountered her at that moment, I might have been swayed by her remorse and accepted her apology. This could have led to more suffering and an eventual divorce. But now, 3 years after her betrayal and our separation, her apology brought me a sense of closure. It released me from the pain I had carried and gave me hope for love once again. Over time, I might even consider revealing that I don't actually have a second daughter, but I'm not sure I'll choose to do so. I no longer owe her anything, and whether I disclose it or keep it to myself is my choice to make. I finally unburdened myself from my obligations to her, and that allowed me to move forward and embrace a new chapter in my life. But that peace was short-lived. Yesterday, I stood at Margot's grave with our children and many relatives, including Veronica. I wept bitterly, just as everyone else did, but not a single tear fell from Veronica's eyes. Margot, in a state of complete despair and intoxication, had been involved in a fatal accident. Her life could not be saved. I thought long and hard about why Veronica had encouraged her sister to pursue an affair, and the only explanation I could come up with was that it was an act of revenge for Margot and me exposing her betrayal, which had destroyed her marriage with Max. Perhaps now, Veronica felt some sense of relief as her sister lay in the casket. One thing I know for certain, I will never love any woman the way I loved Margot. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.